Welcome to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Tom Kelly, your nonprofit catalyst. As the founder of Charity Auctions Today and Donor Books, I've spent almost 2 decades helping organizations like yours break through fundraising barriers, engage communities on a deeper level, and accelerate meaningful growth. In this podcast, along with my incredible guests, we'll uncover transformational ideas, tackle challenges head-on, and share insider strategies that you won't find anywhere else. Each episode is designed to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark and beyond, because impact doesn't scale by chance, it scales by choice. So let's get started. Jessica, thank you so much for being on the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast today.
Awesome, Tom. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so today we're talking about, how a nonprofit knows if they're ready to start accepting grants. And, every nonprofit I feel like at the beginning is like, hey, grants, free money. But it's more than just being able to capture money. It's funny, actually, I help high net worth individuals set up family foundations. And one of the first questions I get is, hey, can you set me up or get me grants? I'm like, it doesn't work that way. It's not just free money. So, how does a nonprofit, or how do you teach nonprofits and assess them to see when they're ready to start maybe going after maybe their first grant?
So it's a great question. I often think that we rain on more parades than not. We seem to be, as time has gone on, we've been doing this for over a decade. And as time has gone on, we seem to be more in the business of telling people not to do it, or kind of advising people, than we are in, supporting, just helping them do the grants just because they, think there might be grants out there, or they have some grants that they'd like to go after. The thing is that grants are a very powerful tool. As you mentioned, foundations exist in varying capacities that have the ability to grant in some cases, significant amounts of money to organizations who have the ability to showcase through both narrative and data of both impact data and budgets to say, like, here's what I could do. Similar to if you went to a bank and you said, hey, I want to start a business, and here's what I've been able to do, so far. And this is why you should trust that if you give me the money, that it'll make a great investment for you. So that's really what we're looking at, right? Is we're looking at nonprofits who have the ability to show enough of proof that they're, fiscally responsible enough, and that they have a clear ability to understand the impact that they're making, and a way to communicate that impact in a succinct narrative. And so, certainly we have very quantitative things that we look at, but a lot of, like I said, the work that we're doing these days is really helping people understand that grants are not a silver bullet funding solution. If anything, often cases in early stages of nonprofits, I would say, it's not a hard and fast number, but certainly under probably $500,000. You're kind of dipping your toes in the grant water, right? It's more about seeing if there's some local, smaller opportunities that you would more than likely qualify for, but that the amount of effort and your return on that investment isn't going to be significant because maybe they're $5,000 or $10,000 grants. Is not to say that there aren't ones that are bigger than that, but it's really about, starting to build the foundation of documentation that you can use both in how you organize and structure your budgets, but also how you're communicating your mission and your programs and the effectiveness of your programs, and being able to convey that to a foundation, or to a funder, to say, here's why you should give me this money. And so in the beginning, it's really about like building muscles. By the time we're working with clients, they have already been running fairly successful grant programs, and they're looking to kind of take it to the next level. And so that's that kind of, space in between. We just started and we're under a $500,000 budget, let's say, is always really about more education and understanding that, do you have the structure set up to be able to run a program successfully, or are we in the let's test some waters out and kind of start to build those muscles phase?
Well, and when let's just say you get rewarded a grant, you have to give the data back to whoever gave you that grant. And there's certain things and requirements that they want you to do and accomplish, right? So what happens if a nonprofit maybe starts a little bit too early, they weren't prepared for that, and they don't deliver on the results back to the grantor?
Such a great point. Honestly, it ends up being probably more headache than it's worth. I think that those are things that often people overlook. We do an extensive amount and are even really shifting the business to be more focused, if not exclusively focused, on the research and strategy side of grants. There's so many amazing writers out there. A lot of our clients have in-house writers that we work with as well. And so the writing for us has taken a back seat to this strategy and research service and kind of role that we've been playing as strategic partners with our clients. Reason being is, number one, the eligibility for a grant and understanding if you're, the criteria and if you're even eligible is like a whole job in and of itself. And then knowing what you're able to use the money for if you are awarded the grant, which in many, if not most cases, is pretty restrictive. It's not like you can get this money and then just spend it however you want, right? And then understanding what reporting requirements there's going to be. So to your point, if it ends up being where for a $10,000 grant, and we hear this a lot from our clients, that some of the smaller grants that they're going after outside of what we're doing with them, that some of the smaller grants are the ones that are most labor intensive in reporting. We had one client who a funder wanted to come do a site visit, like a last minute site visit for a $5,000 grant. And that's a lot of resources. I mean, this is an organization who's going after $500,000 grants or multi-million-dollar government grants. And there's this funder who wants to get, come have their whole operation stop to walk them around the site and answer all these questions for a $5,000 opportunity. And so I think it's really about having a system and a process in place to be able to analyze all the opportunities that are out there and determine for the effort of time and money that will go into it, will it be worth it for what you could potentially get, knowing that you won't even get all the ones you apply for. So, making sure we've had clients who got grants and turned them down because the reporting requirements ended up being so stringent that it wasn't worth it to even, to take the award.
And, with the, time requirement and the resources that the nonprofit has to, put towards just fulfilling the grant after they get it, you said under $500,000 in, revenue for the nonprofit is kind of maybe you're dipping your toes in the water. Is there a number of employees or volunteers or support that a nonprofit should have in place ahead of time before they start to kind of go down the, hey, let's start applying for grant stage?
Yeah, it's another great question. I would say for us, we really look at an organization who has, the number is less important than the power behind the number, like how that's utilized. We have, we've seen organizations who are huge that aren't running as efficiently as really small organizations with, a really tight team and maybe a handful of volunteers. What we really look for and kind of emphasize is the strength of your development team. Depending on your size and your structure and how you're operating, if you're operating really efficiently, it could be one or two people who are kind of, tackling the key pieces. You need to certainly have somebody, which sometimes comes from the program side of things. Sometimes it comes from the development side, who's has a really good grasp on the programming and will have the ability to report back a lot of those, reporting requirements that the funder's going to ask for if the grant is awarded. But even before, there's so much emphasis on the getting the money and what happens after the money. But it's what are you doing to get the money, right? Like it's not a given that unless you were invited and it's like, hey, we want to give you this money, but the grant is a formality, which is not as often as nonprofits, as you can imagine, are going after. You're replying to, in most cases, a public request for proposal, right? Or at least something that many other nonprofits know about. And so we feel like the most important thing is to have the resources and a process to have somebody on your side that can really be dedicated to building relationships with those funders. It's the same thing as major gifts, which is why I often tell smaller organizations, for the amount of work you're going to have to go into and put into to go after this grant, if you're not eligible yet for sizable grants, it most likely is more beneficial for you to dedicate that effort into relationship building and starting to build a major gifts program than it is to try to go after grants and not work on the relationship building, most likely or possibly not get those grants and then still not have a major gifts program, right? So it's really about kind of the order that you do things. But I would say that relationship component is a huge piece of it that is very often overlooked, especially in grants, because I think sometimes people, because it's not individuals that are giving the money, they don't think about the fact that there is an individual deciding whether they're going to grant the money or not. And so finding out who that individual is or that group of individuals and building a relationship is really important.
And when you want to build that relationship with that individual that is potentially giving you the grant, is that because you want to go back year after year and ask for another grant, or when that project or grant is fulfilled, going back for a second? It's not a one and done, it sounds like. Basically, like you build a relationship, you get the one grant, you kind of want to keep coming back if there's potentially more money available, right?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think it's, I always say, like, I think we overcomplicate it sometimes, that it's really like a friendship, right? Like if somebody you've never heard from before, like calls you up and says, hey, can you do me a favor? You're less likely to say, I don't even know who you are, right? Maybe they have a compelling story. Maybe it's a stranger on the side of the road who says like, hey, my car broke down and I have a 3-year-old and you also have a 3-year-old. And so you're like, gosh, if this happened to me and I had my 3-year-old in the car, that would be stressful. So maybe you're more compelled, right? Those are all the starts of finding these commonalities. As time goes on, you think about who are the people who you're in your life who you're most willing to do kind of anything for. It's the people who have built relationships with you, and it's, they're supporting you in the things you need as well. And that's kind of the, treat it like a friend. And if it's in the beginning stages of a friendship, which it is if it's a cold opportunity, right? Like you probably don't even know this person, then you're exclusively building the relationship on a commonality of mission. So this funder's job is to grant money based on the organization or organizations they believe are best suited to deliver on their mission, which is, solving X issue, right? Or helping to eradicate or to improve the conditions of certain communities or issues. And so your job is to figure out how your organization fits that need. Hey, I understand, and I've done some research, and and our team helps with this. Is kind of like, here's who they've given money to in the past. Here's the stuff they're really passionate about. Here's how their funding priorities have shifted. And so you can really lean into that and say, hey, I've noticed that you're really investing in early childhood education in these communities. This is what we're doing to improve early childhood education in those communities. And maybe that's only a portion of what you're doing, but you're finding these commonalities, right? Like you wouldn't go hang out with a bunch of friends who are into the theater and then walk into this room and be like, hey, did you see the football game last night? Because that's not what even if maybe some of them do like it and you like theater and football and cooking, you're going to find the thing that makes you most relatable to this group to build a relationship and build a conversation. It's the same principles apply to, because at the end of the day, it's all still humans, right?
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier. So that's like the rapport building, the almost the sales side of things, right? Yeah. You have to build that relationship. But earlier you said, like, is it just worth it to have this grant? Can you just double click on that and just maybe give some examples of grants that just aren't worth it? I know you mentioned one earlier where, like, for a $5,000 grant, they wanted you to basically stop your whole operation for a day and walk them through. Are there any other examples of some grants that just might not be worth it?
It's a great question. And it is, as you can imagine, it has a lot of context and is relative to the situation. So for that example of the 5,000, the reason it didn't make as much sense is because this organization has scaled, as we've been working with them for almost 10 years, and they've scaled so significantly over the years that the cost of them stopping everything for that doesn't make sense now. But it did make sense probably 8 years ago. It probably like you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. Like at any point in the early stages, you kind of say yes to as many things as you can when those opportunities.
Whatever you can get.
Exactly. So it is, again, relative to that. However, I would say on a macro, from a macro point of view, things that stand out to me would be like government grants. We don't even do government grants. We have partners that we can bring in if a client is looking to do it. They're just very labor intensive. The higher up in government you get, the more, complicated they get. They could take months to understand the eligibility, to put all the paperwork together, to submit the proposal. It requires, all hands on deck from multiple departments within your organization. It's such a significant, and again, not to say that could be $500,000, $1 million, multiple millions of dollars. It's just at what cost. And it's so contingent on the reporting requirements and what the money can be used for and where your organization is uniquely positioned for growth. If it's a, government grant that's giving money that's exactly this, huge gap that you have to fill, and you're going to want to use it the exact way that it's being given, and you feel comfortable that you have the capacity to do the reporting requirements, that it could be a perfect fit, right? It's still a significant amount of money. But if it ends up being where a lot of our clients, we've talked about where it's like mission creep, where it's like, in order to get the money, you have to compromise a little bit on, oh, we'll do this thing or we'll do that thing. Well, now all of a sudden that's costing you more, right? Of time and money and just like mental, load. To like really think about like, how are we going to do this? And you're going to have to convince your team to do it. And you're going to have to explain to your other funders, like, why it is that you're all of a sudden doing this thing. So I would say that that's probably one of them. The other thing that we've seen in, kind of more recent years, especially, for example, we have some clients down in South Florida in the art space. And, government money, as things are evolving in our country, can be fickle, just as private funding can be fickle. But on a government level, if there's a giant cut, then that money can just go away. And so not only is it hard to get, but it also can be kind of taken away, unexpectedly, which is more rare, but it does happen. The other one I will say is, again, just funders with complex reporting requirements. We have one client who sits in like kind of across, so they service communities across multiple counties that different United Way funders fund, and they got a grant from a United Way that required reporting in a way that the way that they would have had to extract it from their databases across these counties was going to be so labor intensive that they just decided it wasn't worth it to take the money, because it didn't fit within the way that their organization was structured to produce the data. And again, it's a little bit of like that creep of, in this case, operational creep. Like, is it worth it to redesign the way that you extract and organize and deliver data for this one funder? Now, if it turned into many funders were asking for it in that way, maybe it does make sense to say, hey, let's restructure the way that we're organizing our data because we could go after a lot more opportunities. But in a one-off circumstance, it often, it seems enticing because it's money, but it's, again, at what cost?
Well, I always try to get nonprofits to think like a business, and that's a business decision, right? Is it going to cost more than the grant is giving you, right? So it's one of those things. What are some of the potential consequences if you aren't providing the reporting or you don't fulfill the requirements that you kind of agreed to receive the grant?
Yep. So, I mean, it's on a case-by-case basis, but it could be everything from not being eligible to reapply for the next open term, right? Like the next time that the application's open for submission, all the way through to like having the money being taken away. So it just kind of depends on, the individual. And we really, we don't go as far as deep into the reporting side of things. What we're really focused on is like way further upstream in the research and the strategy behind what opportunities are we looking for and why. And then we really kind of like let our clients, like we try to set them up for the most success up front so that they don't get themselves into those situations. And so a lot of what we're doing is understanding how our clients' organizations or businesses, as you say, we say the same thing, like how your business is structured and what limitations may exist, so that when we present all of the opportunities, right, we're going to go in, we're going to do a round of research about every 6 to 12 months for our clients. And in that, we're going to show all the opportunities we found, what we believe to be the greatest, opportunities for success in not only receiving the funding, because maybe you already have relationships in place, or maybe, we think that you're just really well positioned to be aligned with what the funder's looking to fund. And then in addition to that, we're going to say, here's opportunities that we don't think are the best fit, or that you're not eligible for, that maybe you think you might be eligible for. So then that's kind of like we're giving the full spectrum of what's possible. And in that, it allows our clients to be able to say, is our overall fundraising strategy aligned with what we're finding in the grant space? Because we also often find that clients are either over or underinflating what they're able to secure from grants. And if that's playing a significant role, if that's representing 30+% of your budget, and you think you can get more than you can get, or you don't realize you can get more than you thought, then that's going to be, right, talk about sales. It's like you don't have a pipeline. So like you're trying to sell $1 million worth of product and you only have $500,000 in the pipeline, and you're not even going to sell all that, So it's really like we're trying to get really far upstream so that our clients don't get themselves into situations where they happen themselves into some money via a grant that now is going to be impossible or very labor intensive and cost intensive to report on.
Well, I think part of this conversation that we're having today also maybe gets rid of some limiting beliefs around when I receive a grant, I'm just getting this money that I can maybe use within. But there's a lot of requirements that come along with that. How many grants have you seen that just will give you money and not have any requirements attached to it?
Oof.
Or is 95 or more percent, 100% always a company with, hey, these are the requirements. We're going to need this information, this data back for the money that we're going to be granting you?
That's a great question. Well, I wouldn't quote, because, I would get it horribly inaccurate, but I would say it's not 100, but it's closer to 90 than to 50, right? Like it's definitely, it's so predicated on this, specific vertical within the sector. It's predicated on, different markets. I think that there's certainly some more innovative funders as this kind of concept of trust-based philanthropy, and then now like big bet philanthropy with the Mackenzie Scotts of the world. And, that I think that we're heading in a direction, and I think the world and where technology is kind of will start to be able to support that there will be ways to reduce the kind of criteria and limitations on how money can be spent, because there'll be a better way to understand the impact that's being achieved. But, again, it's frustrating because I know a lot of our clients with such amazing missions and ability to deliver on those missions and create such impact are so limited by how they can spend money in certain areas. It's getting better, but it's still really challenging. It's very challenging for for our clients, for organizations in general, to get capacity building money. And so then it's a little bit like, imagine an investor saying, for-profit business investor saying, I'm only going to invest in your business if you have 90% margins. Like, that's nuts. It's like, it's like, if you did 20, and in some cases, I'm going to invest in you if you're not even making money, right? Like in the for-profit sector, businesses and entrepreneurs and inventors, and there's just so much more room for failing forward and taking risk and proving out like innovative models, because they're able to get access to money that is to just test something and see how it goes, or like, hey, I have this model and here's how far I've gotten and I just need this extra bump to get that next step. So grants aren't there yet. They're not that tool. I think there are some opportunities, and there's more opportunities coming about, but that would definitely be more in the kind of like, specific subset of like a major donor, or different people that are kind of looking more about like investing more like a VC mindset than it is about like these institutional investors that are more like the foundations.
Well, that's why I think this talk today is so valuable. It's because most small or young nonprofits think that they're just going to get money, but there's a whole slew of things that you have to do for that money.
Yeah.
And it's worth it, but you definitely need to make sure, like you do for your clients, make sure that they're ready at their stage to be able to fulfill those requirements. And if you are, then it's worth doing. But if you're not, just hold off, get your pieces in place, and then start to apply for grants.
Correct.
Is there any, we talked about some red flags. What are some red flags that you've noticed with people that you've worked with that make it clear that you are just not ready to, at this stage, to start applying for grants, that you're basically almost setting yourself up for failure for the first one, instead of maybe just taking a step back, putting some pieces in place, and then applying for your first grant?
Great question. I would say for us, again, just because of the stage of nonprofits that we work with, we typically look for organizations who have a track record. It doesn't need to be significant. It doesn't need to be that they've gotten, huge six-figure grant awards, but some track record of grant success. Because for us, we're going to be taking all that documentation, we're going to be analyzing it, to do research, and then helping to improve the narrative on it. I would say, for us, again, because we're looking to go after, larger opportunities, audited financials, that ends up being, a pretty big criteria for grantors as the grant sizes get larger. I would say, we use some quantitative metrics just in the way that we onboard clients. We have a very, pretty extensive vetting period before we bring a client on, which has, kind of a list of both quantitative and qualitative things that they need, requirements they need to meet. A lot of it's documentation. Some of it is mindset. Some of it is around the structure of their development team and kind of the way that they work with the programming side of things. But then it's also like, once we start working with a client, there's still a period, we can only vet so much of whether we think we'll be successful. A lot of organizations, it's hard. Everyone's doing such amazing work. It's really hard to say to somebody, I don't know that this is the best fit right now. So the next kind of vet, once we onboard a client, is the speed at which they can pull together the documentation to get it to us. So we typically say that for what we're requesting, it'll take about a week to pull it all together. If you have everything organized, if your budgets are structured, and if your documentation is in some sort of centralized place. But as you can imagine, even large organizations, oftentimes we've had situations where it's taken multiple weeks, if not more than a month. And if it starts to get too far down the path where it's too hard for them to even pull that together, either because of how it's organized or not, or because their structure, like, organizationally as humans, they're not structured in a way that allows them to do that, then oftentimes we'll kind of just stop the relationship or pause it to say, hey, we thought things were a little bit more organized. If this is how complicated it is to get the paperwork together, then when we start to submit, we start to do research and give you all these opportunities, and we need to go through them together. And then we start to draft, proposals, and you have to provide feedback to make revisions. It's just going to start to back up. We run on a membership model. And so if you're not able to kind of keep the train moving, at a pretty consistent pace on your end, then everything's going to back up pretty quickly.
Is there, for a young nonprofit, is there a specific type of grant category that is kind of like the low-hanging fruit that would be a good grant to go after for their first one, to kind of dip their toes in it and just kind of learn without a lot of risk or heavy lifting?
Yes. I would say there's a lot of really great community grants and even like corporate grants at the local level that you want something, obviously you want it to have some sort of criteria, some sort of formality and structure, because it's going to help you to get all of that in place and start to build that. But you just really want to look and see like what the process for them reviewing the grants is going to be. And then also like who they've granted in the past, like how they kind of give them out. Does it end up looking like it's the same like 5 organizations all the time? So is it, and then focus on the relationship, talk to somebody at that organization, really understand like what they're trying to accomplish with their grants, right? Because that's again, not to, reiterate, but like that is a piece of it, is that they have a business goal. These foundations have a business goal for why they're giving out the money. And so really intimately understanding why that is another great skill set to kind of build, a muscle to build. And then just as we've talked about, quite a bit, is like really checking out the reporting requirements, because there's nothing worse, even though, I would say most money is good money, but some money, it's like if you end up having to do so much work after the fact, then, that would just be the last check.
Well, and especially if it's only you, if you're the original founder, you're the only person that's, kind of putting in the work and the time in the foundation. You don't have, you can't help anybody else that your mission's there to help if you're constantly focusing on reporting and fulfilling all the requirements for a grant. So, trying to find somebody that could be dedicated to just doing that would, pretty much be the first step. What advice would you give a nonprofit that's just starting out? I know we just kind of gave some low-hanging fruit, but is there any other advice, before even kind of going after that, that could maybe help them, that they can start to think about now that will help prepare them for just knowing that they might be ready for going after their first grant, or anything that they should make sure that they have in place?
It's a good question. It's kind of like if I asked you, like, what advice would you give for someone who says, I want to start a business? Well,
I would say, what my answer would be is just do it. Just do it. Stop thinking about it.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many things. I mean, not to go, because it's not like we kind of already touched on, like, what are the requirements? What are the documentations? What are the things to look out for? I would say read some business books, read some books of like, how do you kind of start an organization, and how do startup businesses approach raising money and kind of getting their initial, right? Like if there's a way to create an earned revenue component to your model where you're not reliant on these kind of decision makers, if you can create some sort of product for the services that you provide that allows you to make money in more of a predictable way, I would think about that you're going to want to over time have a diverse revenue sources, right? Like money coming from diverse places, and then kind of lean into like, what are your skill sets? And I mean, any person starting a business and any person you're a salesperson for as long as till you have to be a salesperson. And in most cases, I mean, I'm in a global entrepreneur organization with, close to 20,000 people all over the world. And there's very few people that I know, they've have to hit a certain scale that's in the, multiple, 6, 7, almost 8, 9 figures before they're not selling anymore. You're always selling something. And so I would say if you're really uncomfortable with sales, either figure out a way to get comfortable with it, or reconsider if it's the, to be starting something. And I would just say start building relationships. I think that the world's always been built on relationships, but I think especially after the past 4 years and kind of getting back to a place of like, we were so disconnected because we had to be, and now people are feeling like really yearning for human connection, that I think we're in like back in the golden era of relationships. It feels like we just get so much, strength from the relationships that we have with our clients, the relationships that we're building with other partners in the industry like yourself, who was like, hey, how can we support each other? What do you have going on? Like, tell me what you're seeing out there that I'm not seeing. And so that kind of like real, like one of our core values is relentless curiosity. It's just like being super curious about like why that funder exists. What are they trying to do? Who's the human behind it? And really getting good at that and kind of systematizing that, because the bigger you get, the more you're going to have to do that at scale, right? In the beginning, maybe it's like a handful of people that you're building relationships with that are kind of funding enough, but then as you go, you're going to need to build that in a way that is repeatable and scalable. But yeah, I would say business, we do that. The same way how you mentioned is like, we talk about everything as a business, and there's so many great business resources for like how to kind of start from zero to, to get to that place where you can start to hire people that maybe would love to do something that you don't love to do.
Yeah. And I think you kind of hit it right there too, is your net worth is a direct reflection of your network. So if you got to build those relationships, you have to just get out of your comfort zone and get into the circles of potential organizations or businesses or people that have the funds to be able to support your organization in the form of either direct donations, sponsorships, or grants. Well, this has been great today, Jessica. How can people get more information about what you do? I mean, this is your world, right? You help organizations, apply for grants, get grants, grants and grant writing is everything that you guys do, and
Yep.
you do a great job at it. How can people get more information on what you do and kind of get into your world to just kind of learn more?
Yep. So checking out our website is always a great start. onedegreeimpact.com, spelled ONE. We're on various social media sites, which are all on the website, but LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. We're always putting out like a ton of great content as far as blog posts and tips for really either really specific things or kind of macro viewpoints on like what's going on with funders, what's going on in the industry. And then I'm always like, I love direct connection. So if you want to email me, it's jessica@onedegreeimpact.com. But again, we love to hear from organizations with really strong missions that are just excited about the impact that they're making in the world. So thank you so much for having me. And hopefully this was, value add to anybody out there listening.
Oh, it for sure was. We'll make sure to include all your links in the bios and the descriptions below. But Jessica, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom, and can't wait to have you back on in a future episode.
For sure. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you for tuning in to the $1 Million Nonprofit Podcast. If you'd like free resources to take your nonprofit to the $1 million mark, visit realtomkelly.com/playbooks. And because I'm committed to helping nonprofits maximize their impact and reach as many people as possible, contact us at hello@realtomkelly.com to explore bringing me in to speak at your next event. And as always, I'm looking forward to sharing more transformative insights with you on our next episode.